Welcome back. This is episode 2 of the Foss Devlog series. I want to thank everyone for their comments and feedback on the previous devlog. I was not expecting the video to do as well as it did. I've been working hard on Foss for this past month, and I'm excited to share the progress. I started the month by experimenting with a new UI for the game. I didn't like the functionality of the existing UI and wanted to make improvements to it. I looked for inspiration from some of the games that originally inspired the idea of Foss. The design I came up with was an improvement, but it's not quite what I wanted, so I'm going to keep trying to make a better one. The next day I started working on the Cartographer for Foss. This will be responsible for generating a 2D image of the map. While not perfect, I got it working pretty well. After all that code, I felt like working on some of the models for the game. I created a model for the mining drill. I didn't get around to texturing it, but I think it turned out pretty good. It feels a bit small right now though. I'm gonna make it bigger in the future, and eventually add some particle effects to it. While making the drill model, I noticed that I had some other completed models that I never put into the game. I finally hooked those up and got them in the game. I noticed some of them could use some adjustments, specifically the offshore pump. I also noticed a pretty major issue with the water shader. It was basically glowing in the dark due to how I blended the colors. I ended up having to rewrite the shader entirely and taking the opportunity to clean it up. It could still use some fine tuning, but I'll get to that in the future. In the middle of the week, I decided that my next goal was to get the combat side of the game in a working state. The first thing I did was replace the cubes that served as the player units with an actual model. The first player unit is the humble hover tank. I also did a bit of simple texturing on this model, as well as added the textures for the enemy building. This building is the Foss Corps, and I finally got it to look like a crystal with energy flowing through it. Over the weekend, I started the monumental task of creating an ECS and burst compatible A-star algorithm. After a few hours of work, I got it to what I thought was a working state. But of course there would be bugs, lots of bugs. One after the other they were squashed and I could start profiling the new Pathfinder. Week 2 started with amazing results. The new Pathfinder was blazing fast. And once I made some tweaks to allow it to reuse the allocated memory, it was even faster with less GC allocations. The new Pathfinder is also much more stable than the previous implementation since it does not read from the map directly. It uses navigation data that is generated based on the current state of the map. This data is more efficiently formatted and doesn't contain unnecessary information. The data is also cached and only regenerated when it's necessary. After ensuring everything worked correctly with the new Pathfinder, I was ready to replace the unit pathfinding with the new version. The replacement required some minor changes to how units calculated and followed their path, but this opportunity allowed me to streamline and optimize the movement code. Foss uses an event system to control and sequence the various systems in the game. As the game grows in complexity, so does the number of events and systems that listen to these events. The existing event system uses strings to identify events. This is great for easily adding new events, but it also makes it just as easy to have a typo. I ended up replacing this system to use native C# events. These events are predefined and offer a much more robust way of handling events, and they're also faster to execute. Last month I implemented Dots Physics into Phos, which will now allow me to utilize spatial queries to detect targets for units to fire at. Every collider in the game belongs to a specified layer. I can use these layers to control the query. By carefully controlling the distribution of collision layers, I can simplify the code for selecting targets. Currently there are 5 layers: default, player, Phos, player projectile, Foss projectile. These collision layers are directly tied to the faction system in the game. It also allows me to query only the desired entities, which will be guaranteed to be something that can be shot at. It took me a while to figure out how to use the collision layer mask correctly, but after a while I finally got it working. The spatial query takes place in 2 phases. First, a very fast overlap check with an axis-aligned bounding box. If there are any entities in the bounding box, it is then further tested for its distance from the unit. If it's within range, it then becomes the active target for the unit. I've been using addressable assets in Phos from very early on, but I never configured it correctly. This mistake caused all the addressable assets to not be included in the standalone build of the game. Now that I've fixed that, I plan to use the addressable system to handle the assignment and management of tile IDs. Addressables will greatly simplify the process of saving and loading the game map. Once I got targeting working, I noticed that all the projectiles were being targeted at the surface of the tile and not the center of the building. This is because the pivot point of all entities is aligned to the surface of the tile. To fix this, I defined a center of mass offset for all buildings. I then added a system to calculate the world space center of mass for all entities. This position can now be used for targeting. Then I updated the targeting system for the Foss Corps to use spatial queries as well. This allows me to take advantage of all the power collision filters give me. Box selection of units also uses spatial queries. Now I felt it was time to revisit the game UI design. The biggest goal of the design was to make sure the UI is minimal and out of the way. I want to rarely obstruct gameplay. This design also addressed some of the feedback I received from the previous UI. The design is not complete, but it's a major step in the right direction. With my distraction on UI design out of the way, it was time to go back to working on the combat system. Since units and buildings could now take damage, it was time to add health bars. I decided to implement these using entities instead of the Unity UI because it would be more efficient to query entities from my job system. I plan to add animations to these in the future. The final week of the month was dedicated to putting together this devlog. I would appreciate any and all feedback on the game or this devlog. I look forward to make many improvements in the future. One final announcement. The source code for Phos is now freely available under the BSD 2 clause plus common clause license. You can view the source code on my GitHub page. The link is in the description. Join the Discord server to see daily development updates and gain access to weekly test builds of the game. Be sure to wishlist Phos on Steam, like the video, and subscribe to see future devlog content. I'll see you next month.